This lesson is use the Fetch API to post, put, and delete data. The objectives for this lesson are to learn to create a request object so that we can then insert data, update data, and delete data. To modify data, we have to pass a request object as the second parameter to the fetch function. The request object looks in its simplest form like this. You specify a JSON object. The first property is method, and you set it to post, put, or delete. The body we will set to json.stringify whatever our entity is, our object that we have created that we're sending across the wire to the web API server. And then for the headers, we typically specify the content type. And since we're using all JSON here, we're going to do application/JSON. So let's go to our server and add our new API endpoints, map post, map put, and map delete. So let's stop the web API server, and right before the app.run, let's add a few more things. So we're going to do an app.mapPost/API/people, passing in a person entity. So we need to be passing in an object that has all of those properties that we saw in our assets. So we're going to do something like this one here, number 1, where we're going to have a person ID, a first name, a last name, an email address, and a start date. And that's what's going to get passed in as this person object. We're then going to call the repo.insert, passing in that entity, and based on whether we get something back or not, we'll know what to report back. If the response come back is not equal to null, well, we got it created. So we'll do a results.created. The first parameter to create it is the actual URL back to that new person. And then we create our new response where we include a 201. It's created, the new person has been added for the message, and the response that we got back from the insert is what we assign to data. If we did get a null back, we're going to do a result.badRequest. So the put, pretty much the same thing. We're going to check to see if the person exists first. If we get back a null, that means we didn't find them, so we'll do a results.notfound. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and do the update, and we're going to assume everything went okay. I didn't put a lot of error handling in here, so you'll want to beef this up definitely for a real-world application, but you get the idea. I'm just trying to get the idea across here. Then we have our map.delete, where we pass in the ID. We go ahead and we go out and we try to do that delete by passing in the entity. That means we have to do a get. And then we either get a no content if it deleted it, or if the delete returns a false, we do a ret equals results.notfound. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this. I'm assuming you already know how to create web APIs. The goal here is to learn how to call them with fetch. Let's go back to our client side and learn how to post data using the Fetch API. Back in our front end, right after the person ID, let's add some more input fields. And this is what we're going to use to build our person object that we eventually send back to the server. Then let's go down, and right after our get a row, let's add a new button that's going to call a function called insert row. But to be able to insert a row, we need to build a person object. So let's create a function called create person object from input. And all I'm going to do is return from this a person ID by grabbing the value out of the input field for person ID. The first name will come from the input field for first name, etc., etc. And that gives us our person object, because we're going to need this both for the insert and for the update. So now let's add our insert row function, which is called from that button. On line 151, we say let entity equals create person object from input. We now have our entity that we want to then stringify. So we're going to do a fetch on line 53. The first parameter, of course, is the API endpoint. The second parameter is that request object. The method is going to be post. The body is going to be json.stringify on that entity. The headers, I'm going to set the content type to application JSON. And then the rest of the code here is actually fairly straightforward. I'm going to do the process response object. Hey, I already got it written. Why not use it? We're going to do the then on our response coming back. I'll put it out to the console, but I'm going to extract the new person ID that got generated, the newer ID, which is one greater than what's already in there, and I'll place it back into that input field. So if we've done everything correctly, let's save our changes. Let's do a hot reload. And once it's ready, let's come back over to our browser And we now see the input fields. We see this new insert a row. Let's click on that. And if everything worked okay, we should get back our response, which says new person added. Status is 201. The status text is created. And if we look at the data, look at that. There's our data that we got out of the input, but the person ID has been updated to the next higher one. If you remember, I had 19 values in that people.json file. So it added one to that. It gave me a person ID of 20. And you can see it also got filled in on the person ID up there in the input field. Remember that number when you're doing this because you're going to need it for the update, which we're going to do next. Now let's take a look at putting data using the Fetch API or updating an existing record. So back in the client side, let's add another button underneath that insert a row. That's going to call a new function we're going to write called update row. So we'll come down here to the bottom and we'll add this new function. And again, we're going to say let entity equals create person object from input. So we're going to grab any changes we make. And then the fetch is going to be the server URI /people / again, whatever we get out of the input field. So we need to make sure that we update that with that value 20 in my case. Then look at the second parameter, which is our request object. Method now is put. The rest is the same. The body is JSON stringify of that entity, and the content type is application JSON. We have our two thens, and we have our catch. So let's save this. Let's do a hot reload. We'll go back here. Let's change the person ID to the one that I got back. Let's do like a Ginger Hollywood here. We'll just change the whole name. And let's update the row. And again, everything should have happened correctly, which means we get a status of 200, status text of OK, message is person updated. And look at that. Our data has indeed been updated. Now, if we go over to the Web API server, and if we open the people.json and we go all the way to the bottom here, look at that. There's our data. And please, again, you would not write this for a multi-user type of situation. I'm doing this just to show you. Typically, we'd be going to a SQL Server database, but this was just the easiest way, so we don't have to mess with any of that for this course. So now that we've seen how to insert and we've seen how to update, let's take a look at deleting data using the Fetch API. Back in the client side, let's add another button. This one will be delete a row, and we're going to call a function called delete row. So we'll add that now down here in the bottom of our scripts. And you can see on this one, all we need to do for this one is grab the person ID. So we're going to grab that. Our fetch then, the first parameter there is server URI /people / and then the ID that we grabbed. So in this case, it'll be 20. But for the request object, the only thing I need here is the method, and it needs to be set to delete. Again, the rest is the same. Let's save this. Let's reload. We come back over here. Let's put in a person ID of 20, and let's call delete a row. And look at this, we get back that 204. And if we go to a Web API server, and we take a look, you can see now that the people.json has indeed been updated, and that last one has been removed. Well, in this lesson, we learned how to pass the request object to our fetch. We inserted data, we updated data, and we deleted data. Coming up next, create a CRUD web page.